You're not part of this family anymore. Don't bother coming back. We're changing the locks tonight. That's what the message said, sitting there on my phone in a Best Western on McLeod Trail, while a Chinook rattled the window and the parking lot lights buzzed orange through the curtains. My son, Trevor, the kid whose skinned knees I'd cleaned with a garden hose, the man I'd handed the keys to everything I'd spent 51 years building. He ended me with his thumbs, standing in my own kitchen, probably still wearing the watch I bought him when he graduated. I read it twice. I set the phone face down on the little laminate desk. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. My hands were steady, which surprised me, because 3 weeks earlier, those same hands had been shaking so badly in a hospital bed that a nurse had to hold the water cup for me. I picked the phone back up, and I typed one word. All right. Then I put it down again, and I looked at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the furnace kick on, and I let myself feel exactly one thing, which was tired. Not heartbroken yet. That came later, and when it came, it nearly took my legs out from under me. But in that first hour, sitting on the edge of a bed that smelled like industrial detergent, I mostly felt tired, and underneath the tired, I felt something colder and cleaner starting to move. Trevor thought he'd won. He and Danielle, his wife, they figured they'd folded up a 72-year-old man and put him out with the recycling. That afternoon, they'd locked me out of the house I built with my own 2 hands, and Danielle had stood on my porch and slid a document across the little table by the door. A power of attorney with my signature on it, except I never signed it, and a doctor's letter saying I wasn't fit to manage my own affairs, from a physician I'd never once met in my life. They looked at my gray hair and the little plastic hospital band I still hadn't cut off my wrist, and they saw a done deal. Here's what they forgot. They forgot I started with a borrowed pickup and a framing hammer and $40, pouring foundations in the cold outside Calgary when the ground was so frozen you had to thaw it with propane before you could dig. They forgot who taught Trevor how to read a spec sheet in the first place. They looked at me and saw an old man. They didn't see the 40 years I'd spent across the table from men who'd cut your throat over a change order. I reached into my bag and took out my laptop. Old habit. I never traveled without it, even to a hospital, even now. I flipped it open and the blue light lit up the ugly floral wallpaper, and I dialed a number I'd had memorized for 2 decades. When you keep the kind of accounts I keep, somebody picks up before the second ring, no matter the hour, a calm young voice. Good evening, Mr. Halloran. How can I help you tonight? I need to put a full hold on the corporate accounts, I said. Everything. The operating accounts, the project accounts, the lines of credit, all of it. And I need it done before this branch opens in the morning. There was the smallest pause. I could hear him typing, and I knew what he was seeing. The numbers climbing on his screen, the ones with a lot of zeros. He asked me to confirm my security phrases, and then he asked, very carefully, if I understood that this would suspend every outgoing transfer, freeze the payroll run, and lock the Trustus accounts tied to the developments in progress. I understand exactly what it does, I said. That's why I'm calling. He put the hold on. It took 9 minutes. When it was done, I thanked him, wished him a good night, and hung up, and I sat there, in the orange half-dark, thinking that 9 minutes ago I'd been a man who'd been thrown away, and now I was a man holding a lit match over everything my son thought he'd stolen. I should tell you how it got to that hotel room, because it didn't happen all at once. Nothing real ever does. My wife Marion passed 4 years ago. Ovarian cancers. Quick and cruel. The kind where you go from planning a trip to Banff for your anniversary to picking out a casket in about 5 months. After she was gone, I did what a lot of men my age do, which is, I poured myself into the work because the work didn't ask me how I was doing. Halloran Developments had grown into one of the bigger private home builders in southern Alberta by then. Subdivisions out in the northeast, a couple of commercial plazas, a chunk of industrial land near the ring road that was worth more than everything else combined. I'd built it deliberately, slowly, the way you build anything that's supposed to last. No stupid debt, no get-rich-quick, just good land, good crews, and patience. Trevor came into the business at 26 with an MBA and a lot of opinions. And I'll be honest with you, because there's no point telling this story if I lie about the parts that make me look bad. I was proud of him. Genuinely proud. He was smooth in a way I never was, good in a boardroom, quick with numbers. I told myself the arrogance would sand down with age. I told myself the way he treated the trades, like they were furniture, was just youth. I kept giving him more, thinking responsibility would grow him up. Marion used to say, "Ray, you keep handing that boy the keys and he keeps driving into the ditch, and you keep buying him a new car." She saw him clearer than I did. Mothers usually do. After the heart scare, I had a mild stroke in March, lost the feeling in my left hand for 2 days, scared the hell out of me. Trevor started coming around the hospital being sweet in a way that should have set off every alarm I owned. Bringing coffee, asking about my medications, asking, real gentle, whether I'd thought about simplifying things so I didn't have to carry so much stress. Danielle brought a lawyer friend by just to chat. I was groggy and grateful and lonely, and I didn't see the shape of it. That's the part that still keeps me up some nights. I didn't see it because I didn't want to. They discharged me on a Thursday. I drove home Friday afternoon to find the locks changed and a moving company's truck backed up to my garage, and my son standing in the doorway of my own house with his arms crossed like a bouncer. Danielle did the talking. She had the documents. She said the doctors had concerns. She said it was for my own protection. She said the family had made a decision. Trevor never once looked me in the eye. He stared at a spot over my shoulder the whole time, jaw working, and I realized my son couldn't look at me, because some part of him still knew exactly what he was doing. I could have made a scene. I could have called the police right there on the driveway, screamed, forced my way in, but something told me not to. 40 years of negotiating teaches you a thing that most people never learn, which is that the loudest man in the room is almost always the one losing. So I got back in my truck. I drove to a Tim Hortons on MacLeod, sat in the parking lot with a double-double going cold in the cup holder, and I did not fall apart. I made a list. Then I checked into a hotel, and a few hours later my phone lit up with that message, and I typed all right, and the cold clean thing in my chest finished waking up. Here's the first thing I did that they never counted on. Around 6 the next morning, before the sun cleared the mountains, I called Malcolm. Malcolm and I go back 30 years. He's a forensic accountant now, half retired, but he started out as the guy who caught the fraud that other accountants missed, and he's the sharpest, meanest, most decent man I know. He drinks tea like the British, does the newspaper crossword in pen, and he owed me nothing except that. Once, a long time ago, I helped him out of a hole when his first wife left him with nothing, and Malcolm is the kind of man who never forgets a thing like that. I told him what happened. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, in that dry way of his, "Ray, this doesn't add up, and I want to know why. So give me your logins and go get some sleep." I didn't sleep, but I gave him the logins. He called me back at noon and told me to come to his condo on the west side, and when I got there he had 3 monitors going and a pot of tea gone stone cold beside him, and a look on his face I'd never seen before. Malcolm doesn't get rattled. Malcolm was rattled. "Sit down," he said. "This is worse than you think, and better than you think, both at once." He'd found the first thing right away. Trevor had been draining the operating accounts for weeks. Not huge amounts at first. 40,000 here, 90 there, checks to companies that didn't build anything, invoices for consulting that never happened. By the time I got locked out, he'd pulled close to 600,000 out through the cracks. And Malcolm said the thing that stuck with me, the thing that turned the whole picture on its head. He said, "Ray, this isn't a man taking over a company. This is a man plugging a leak. 600 grand is real money, but it's not company money. It's panic money. He's bleeding somewhere else, and he's using your accounts to press on the wound." And that's when the sick feeling I'd been carrying since the porch finally had a name. Trevor hadn't locked me out because he wanted my chair. He locked me out because he needed me gone and declared incompetent, so I couldn't stop him from doing something much bigger, something that would sink us both. He didn't want the company. He wanted the company's blood. It took Malcolm the better part of 2 days to find the rest. He barely slept either. He kept sending me messages at 2 in the morning, one word, digging, and I'd sit up in that hotel bed with the Chinook, still moaning outside, and I'd feel the years press down on me, and I'd think about Trevor at 6 years old, falling asleep in the truck on the way home, from a job site with sawdust in his hair, and I'd have to get up and splash water on my face 'cause a man can only mourn so much in one sitting. When Malcolm finally found the source of it, he didn't say anything on the phone. He just told me to come over. And when I sat down, he turned the middle monitor toward me, and I looked at it. And for a second, I honestly couldn't understand what I was seeing. My son, it turned out, had discovered leverage. Not the good kind. He'd gotten into options trading about 18 months back, big leveraged bets on a couple of tech names, and one commodity play, the kind of thing where you can turn $1 million into 3 or into nothing in a week. For a while he'd won. That was the poison. He won early and big, and it made him feel like a genius. And a man who feels like a genius stops being careful. Then he made one enormous bet, borrowed against it, and the market did what the market does to greedy men, which is it waited until he was all in, and then it turned around and buried him. But here's what turned my stomach to ice water. To borrow the kind of money he was borrowing, he needed collateral. And the collateral he pledged wasn't his. It was ours. He'd forged my signature, the one I'd been signing on contracts since before he was born, to guarantee a private loan against the industrial land by the ring road, the crown jewel, the piece I'd bought a quarter section at a time over 15 years. And when his bet collapsed, the loan came due, and it wasn't a loan from a bank. Banks send letters. Banks renegotiate over lunch. This was a private lending syndicate, operating through a string of numbered companies. The kind of money that comes with no paperwork and no patience. Offshore accounts, feeding into offshore accounts. The kind of people who don't call a lawyer when you miss a payment. Malcolm scrolled, and the number at the bottom made me put my hand flat on his desk to steady myself. Trevor owed $9 million. $9 million. To people who do not forgive $9 million. And now the whole ugly thing snapped into focus. The panic. The sudden rush to have me declared incompetent. The fire sale. Because there was a fire sale, Malcolm found it. A pending deal to dump the Ring Road land to a numbered company at nearly 40% below what it was worth, closing in 3 days. Trevor didn't lock me out so he could run my legacy. He locked me out because the wolves were already scratching at the door, and he needed me legally erased so I couldn't stop the bleed before he finished the amputation. The plan was this: liquidate the Ring Road land through the forged power of attorney, wire roughly $12 million out through a shell to the offshore lenders, 9 to clear the debt, and 3 to disappear with. And Danielle's brother, it turned out, was the buyer on the other end of that discounted land deal, so the family got to keep the difference too. Then he and Danielle were going to be gone. Malcolm had found the flights, 2 one-way tickets to a country with no extradition treaty, booked under Danielle's maiden name, departing the Tuesday after the deal closed. And the truly evil part, the part that made me understand I'd raised a stranger, was that, by pushing it all through under my forged signature and my name, they were setting it up so that when the whole thing collapsed, when the RCMP and the tax people and the fraud investigators came looking, they'd come looking for me. They were going to leave a 72-year-old man to take the fall for $9 million in fraud and vanish to a beach. I sat in Malcolm's condo for a long time after he stopped talking. Outside, the light was going pink over the mountains, and I could hear kids playing road hockey down the street. Somebody yelling in car, normal life going on. And I felt the grief finally arrive, the real thing, the thing I'd been holding back for 2 days. Because the hardest part of what Trevor did wasn't the money. I want to be clear about that. The money I could lose and survive. The hardest part was the moment I understood that the little boy with the sawdust in his hair would have let his own father rot in prison, alone, to save himself. That's a specific kind of death, watching your child die inside a living body. I let myself grieve it. I sat there and I cried, an old man crying in a friend's condo, and Malcolm had the decency to go make more tea and pretend not to notice. And then I was done. I wiped my face, and the grief went somewhere and it did not come back. And in its place was that cold, clean certainty again, harder now, like concrete that's finally cured. All right, I said. What do we do? Now, here's where I have to tell you the part where I almost got it wrong, because it matters. My instinct, 40 years of instinct, was to move right now. Block the land deal. March into the RCMP detachment with Malcolm's files. Freeze the transfer. Break the man's fingers, so to speak, before he could pull the wallet out of my pocket. When you see a thief with his hand in your coat, you don't wait around. But Malcolm stopped me. He put his hand flat on the desk the way I'd put mine, and he said, "Ray, if we move now, we've got an attempted fraud and a family squabble, and a forged signature he'll swear was a mistake. He'll hire lawyers. He'll say it was an aggressive restructuring, a misunderstanding, a father and son who don't get along. He'll drag your name through the mud in civil court for 3 years, and he might walk." He looked at me over his glasses. "But if we let the fraud complete, if we let that money actually move, then it's not a family squabble anymore. Then it's real fraud, over $5,000, with a forged instrument, moving across borders. Then it's the kind of thing the RCMP and Fintrack take seriously. The crime finishes when the money moves. We have to let him pull the trigger before we can put him away." Letting him pull the trigger meant letting $12 million of my life's work slide toward a shell company and a syndicate of loan sharks. Every cell in my body was against it, but I trusted Malcolm more than I trusted my own anger, so I made myself do the hardest thing I've ever done in business, which is nothing. Not quite nothing. We built the trap. Malcolm knew people, a fraud investigator with the RCMP he'd worked cases with before, a woman named Priya, who ran the commercial crime side and who did not suffer fools. We laid it all out for her over 2 days in a boardroom that smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. The forged POA, the fake doctor's letter, which turned out to be from a physician whose license had actually been suspended 2 years earlier, another thread they'd hoped nobody would pull. The drained accounts, the $9 million debt, the discounted land deal to the brother-in-law, the one-way tickets. Priya listened to all of it with a face like a poker player, and at the end she said, quietly, "We're going to let it close, and we're going to be waiting on the other side." She had me quietly cooperate with the bank, so the $12 million transfer would be allowed to initiate on the morning of closing. But, the moment it moved, it would trip a flag that had been preloaded, and everything would freeze 1 second too late for Trevor to notice, and 1 second too early for the money to actually clear to the syndicate. Fintrack would get the suspicious transaction report the instant it fired, and the RCMP would already be positioned. The whole thing would snap shut like a trap on a wolf, and my son would be standing in it before he even heard the metal move. There was no dramatic warning. That's the thing about how these things actually work. There's no alarm, no countdown, just an ordinary Monday morning, and a transfer sitting in a queue, waiting for the bank to open, and a man on the other end of the city about to reach out and pull a lever he thought would set him free, not knowing the floor under him was already gone. The night before, in that same ugly hotel room, I didn't sleep at all. I lay there and I thought about Marion. I talked to her actually out loud, which I'd started doing after she passed and never quite stopped. I said, "You saw this coming, didn't you? You knew what he was, and you loved him anyway, and you loved me enough not to say it too plain." I told her I was sorry I hadn't listened, and I told her what I was going to do afterward, the plan that had been forming in the back of my mind through all of it. And I swear the furnace clicked off at just the right moment, like the room was listening, and I chose to believe that was her telling me she approved. Monday morning I sat in Priya's office with Malcolm beside me and a cold cup of that terrible detachment coffee in my hand. Nobody said much. At 9:04 a.m., a young officer at a laptop in the corner looked up and said simply, "It's moving." I closed my eyes. $12 million of my life left the account. For about 4 seconds it was gone, and I made myself sit with that, and then the officer said, "Frozen," and it was done. The trap was shut. They arrested Trevor at 11 that morning, at the title company's office, with the pen practically still in his hand. Danielle they picked up at the house 2 hours later, standing in my kitchen, with the suitcases already packed by the door. The brother-in-law folded within a day and gave a statement that buried both of them. The forged medical letter took down the crooked doctor, and the private lenders, well, when $9 million in dirty money suddenly can't move, and Fintrack starts pulling threads, those people don't come looking for their debtor anymore. They cut their losses and vanish back into whatever hole they crawled out of. That was maybe the only clean mercy in the whole thing. The wolves at the door simply melted away once the meat wasn't worth the risk. I didn't go to the arrest. I couldn't have watched it. Priya told me about it afterward, gently, and she said something I've held on to. She said, "In 20 years I've seen a lot of families do this to each other. Mr. Halloran, and the ones who survive it are the ones who understand that letting your child face what he's done is not the same as abandoning him. It's the last honest thing a parent can do. Trevor called me from a phone at the remand center a week later. First time he'd looked for me since the porch. I let it go to voicemail, and I sat in the truck in the parking lot of that same Tim Hortons where I'd made my list, and I listened to it. He didn't apologize. That's what I remember. 2 minutes of my son's voice and not one word of sorry, just fear and blame and a demand that I fix it, that I make it go away, that I remember he was family. Family. He used that word like it was a debt I owed him after everything. I listened to the whole thing twice, and then I deleted it, and I finished my coffee, and I drove home to the house I'd finally gotten back, and I changed the locks myself, with my own hands, which by then had gotten their strength back. That was almost 2 years ago now. I want to tell you what I did with the rest, because the money part is really the smallest part of this. I got it all back. The land, the company, every dollar. And I sat with it for a while, and I realized something that surprised me, which is that I didn't want it the way I used to. Building an empire to hand down to a bloodline made sense to me my whole life. It doesn't anymore. What's the point of hoarding a mountain for people who'd bury you under it? So I did something Marion would have loved. I took a big piece of that industrial land, the Ring Road parcel, the crown jewel, the thing Trevor tried to burn me for, and I sold part of it at a good price this time, to the right people, and I put the money into something I called the Marion Halloran Trades Fund. It puts kids through apprenticeships, carpentry, electrical, plumbing, welding, the trades, the exact work I started with, the work that built everything I have. Kids from group homes, kids from reserves, kids whose fathers left, kids nobody was betting on. We partner with the college here in the city, and I spend my mornings now not in boardrooms but in shop classes and job sites, watching some 19-year-old lay his first real course of block, watching his face when it comes out level. They're not standing in the shadows waiting for me to die so they can pick over what's left. They're the opposite of that. They want to learn how to build the thing themselves. I promoted the people at the company who'd stood by me too. The ones who'd noticed something was wrong when Trevor grabbed the wheel and had the guts to question it. The ones who called me at the hospital just to see how I was, not what I'd leave them. My site super. Priya's not the only good one with that name. My own Priya, 22 years on my cruise, I made her a partner. Malcolm finally, fully retired. But he comes by every second Tuesday, and we drink terrible black coffee and do the crossword and argue about the flames. And now and then we talk about the kids in the fund instead of about crooks, and that's a better use of 2 old men's mornings than we used to have. I'm 74 now. The stroke was a warning about my body. What Trevor did was a warning about my soul, and honestly the second one healed me more than the first one hurt me. I don't spend a single hour anymore trying to earn love from people who only ever saw me as a bank machine that happened to have a heartbeat. I keep my peace the way I used to keep my accounts, carefully, and with the door locked to the people who'd robbed me. People ask me sometimes if I misses my son. And I tell them the truth, which is that I miss a boy who's been gone a long time, longer than I let myself admit. The man who packed those suitcases by my kitchen door, I don't miss him, because I never really knew him, and by the time I did it was too late to do anything, but let him go. Blood made Trevor my son. It didn't make him my family. The kids in that shop class, the crew that stood by me, Malcolm with his crossword and his tea. I chose them, and they chose me back, and it turns out the family you build on purpose holds a lot better than the one you just happened to be handed. There's a granddaughter too. Trevor's girl Cole, she's 11. Danielle's people kept her from me for a while out of spite, but the courts saw sense, and now she comes every second weekend. We're planting a garden together in Marion's old flower beds, tomatoes and beans, and a stubborn little apple tree that probably won't survive the winter, but we planted it anyway. Cole doesn't know most of it yet. Someday she'll be old enough, and I'll tell her the truth, all of it, the way I'm telling you, because a person deserves to know where they come from and what they're not obligated to become. She has her grandmother's stubbornness, and none of her father's hunger, and I have decided that's my second chance, and I'm not going to waste it. The storm that was meant to level me just cleared the lot, and you'd be surprised at my age how good it feels to finally start building something you actually want to leave behind. So, do you think I did the right thing letting my own son fall? Or do you think a father should catch his child no matter what he becomes? I've made my peace with my answer. I'd like to hear yours. Leave it below. And if this found you tonight, the way these things sometimes do, take care of yourself, and I'll see you with another one soon.